The tires screeched as the pickup truck roared past, its occupants hurling slurs that cut through the humid Tennessee air like shards of glass. Caleb, barely 20, clutched Eli's hand, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. They stood frozen on the cracked sidewalk of their small Memphis neighborhood, the weight of the town's hatred pressing down like a storm cloud ready to break. It was 1995, and Memphis was no haven for two young men in love. Caleb, with his tousled brown hair and restless energy, had grown up here, in a city that felt like a maze of judgment. Eli, quieter, with deep brown eyes and a steady presence, had moved to town 2 years ago, hoping for a fresh start. They'd met at a local diner, where Caleb bussed tables and Eli sketched in a worn notebook. A single glance over his steaming coffee pot had sparked something neither could ignore, a connection that felt like salvation in a world that branded them sinners. But salvation came at a cost. That night, as the truck's taillights vanished, Caleb's older brother, Mark, emerged from the shadows. His face, usually warm with sibling camaraderie, was twisted with rage. "You think you can just flaunt this in our town?" He spat, his voice low but venomous. Caleb's stomach churned. Mark had seen them holding hands at the county fair, and now the secret was out. By morning, whispers had spread like wildfire through their church, their school, their entire world. The pastor's sermon that Sunday was a thinly veiled attack, his words dripping with righteous fury. Abominations have no place in God's city. Caleb and Eli tried to hold on. They met in secret, stealing moments in abandoned lots or the back of Eli's beat-up Chevy. But the town closed in. Caleb's parents, devout and unyielding, gave him an ultimatum: get right with God, or get out. Eli's landlord, citing community standards, evicted him with no notice. Friends turned away. Strangers stared. One night, a group of men cornered them outside a bar, fists flying before Caleb could even raise a hand. Bruised and bleeding, they stumbled back to Eli's car, knowing they couldn't stay. "We have to leave," Eli whispered, his voice steady despite the swelling around his eye. Caleb nodded, tears mixing with the blood on his cheek. They packed what little they had: clothes, a few books, Eli's sketches, and drove west, toward California, toward a life where they could breathe. Memphis faded in the rearview mirror, but its scars lingered, etched into Caleb's heart. He swore he'd never return. The road to San Francisco was long, both literally and figuratively. They settled in the Castro, a neighborhood pulsing with life and acceptance. For the first time, Caleb felt free to hold Eli's hand in public, to laugh without looking over his shoulder. They built a life small, imperfect, but theirs. Caleb found work as a community organizer, his natural charisma drawing people to him. Eli pursued art, his sketches evolving into vibrant paintings that captured the city's spirit. They were happy, but Caleb carried a quiet ache for the home he'd been forced to flee. Memphis was a ghost that haunted him, a reminder of rejection but also of roots he couldn't fully sever. Years passed, and their love deepened, tested by life's inevitable struggles, bills, arguments, the slow grind of time. But they were a team. Caleb's fire balanced Eli's calm, and together they navigated a world that was changing, slowly, unevenly. By 2015, same-sex marriage was legal, and they stood in a San Francisco courthouse, exchanging vows with tears in their eyes. "We made it," Eli whispered, and Caleb believed him. But Memphis was never far from Caleb's thoughts. He followed the city's news, wincing at reports of hate crimes, of policies that lagged behind the times. Part of him wanted to forget, to let the city rot in its own prejudice. Yet another part is stubborn. Defiant part dreamed of something bigger. What if he could go back? What if he could change things? In 2016, a phone call changed everything. A childhood friend, now a lawyer in Memphis, reached out. The city's a mess. Caleb, we need people like you. The mayor's office was mired in corruption scandals, and the city council was a battleground of old grudges and new fears. Caleb laughed it off at first. Him? Run for office? But Eli saw the spark in his eyes. You've always been a fighter, Eli said, squeezing his hand. Maybe it's time to fight for home. Caleb's decision to return wasn't easy. It meant facing the ghosts of his past, his family, his tormentors, the town that had spit him out. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt a fire kindling. He wasn't the scared kid anymore. He was a man with a voice, a purpose, and a love that had survived the worst the world could throw at him. So, in 2017, he and Eli packed up their San Francisco apartment and drove back across the country, back to the city that had once broken them. Memphis hadn't changed as much as Caleb had hoped. The skyline was taller, the streets busier, but the air still carried the weight of old prejudices. As he and Eli unpacked in a modest rental on the city's east side, Caleb felt the eyes of neighbors curious, wary, some openly hostile. He was no stranger to this scrutiny, but it stung anew, like a wound reopened. Eli, ever the optimist, hung one of his paintings, a vibrant swirl of blues and golds in the living room wall. This is home now, he said, his voice a quiet anchor. Caleb nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. Could he really do this? Running for city council was his first step. He started small, attending community meetings, listening to the gripes of shop owners and the dreams of young activists. His years in San Francisco had taught him how to organize, how to speak with conviction. But Memphis was a different beast. The city was a patchwork of pride and pain, where progress clashed with tradition. At his first public forum, a heckler shouted, "Go back to California. Queer." The room went silent. But Caleb didn't flinch. "I'm here because this is my home," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm not leaving again." A few clapped. Others whispered. But he saw a flicker of respect in some eyes. Eli was his rock. But the campaign took its toll. Late nights were spent strategizing over coffee, mapping out neighborhoods to canvas. Eli designed flyers, his artist's eye making them pop with color and hope. But the threats came to anonymous letters. Slashed tires. A brick through their window one rainy night. Caleb's brother Mark, now a mechanic with a family of his own, refused to meet him. "I don't want trouble," Mark said over the phone, his voice cold. Caleb hung up, his chest tight with grief. He'd hoped time might soften his brother's heart, but some wounds ran too deep. The campaign gained traction, though. Caleb's message of inclusivity, jobs, and transparency resonated with younger voters and those tired of the city's stagnant leadership. He spoke at churches, barbershops, even the local LGBTQ center, which had sprung up in his absence. There, he met Sarah, a trans woman in her 30s who ran the center with fierce determination. "You're not alone," she told him, her eyes bright with solidarity. She introduced him to a network of activists, people who'd been fighting for change while he was gone. Their energy fueled him, but the opposition was relentless. A local pastor, Reverend Holt, launched a smear campaign, calling Caleb's candidacy an affront to God. Flyers with his and Eli's faces, defaced with slurs, appeared on lampposts. One night, after a heated debate, Caleb came home to find Eli sketching furiously, his jaw tight. "They don't get to win," Eli said, not looking up. "Not this time." Caleb pulled him into a hug, their shared resolve a shield against the world. But the fear lingered. What if they lost? What if Memphis rejected them again? By election day, Caleb was exhausted but hopeful. He and Eli stood outside a polling station, handing out buttons with their campaign slogan, Memphis for All. When the results came in, Caleb won by a narrow margin. The crowd at their campaign headquarters erupted. But Caleb's eyes were on Eli, who smiled through tears. "You did it," Eli whispered. It was a victory, but Caleb knew it was only the beginning. As a councilman, Caleb pushed for better funding for schools, protections for marginalized communities, a task force to address hate crimes. But every step was a battle. Older council members dismissed him, and the mayor, a grizzled politician named Dixon, saw him as a threat. "You're stirring up trouble," Dixon warned at a closed-door meeting. Caleb leaned forward, unflinching. "Trouble's already here. I'm just shining a light on it." The real test came when a local high school banned a gay student from prom. The story hit national news, and Caleb saw his chance. He organized a public rally, standing shoulder to shoulder with Sarah and the student, a shy 17-year-old named Jordan. "This city belongs to you too," Caleb told him, his voice cracking with emotion. The rally drew hundreds, but also counter-protesters, their signs quoting scripture. Violence nearly broke out, and Caleb's heart raced as he shielded Jordan from a thrown bottle. That night, he couldn't sleep, haunted by the boys' fear and his own memories. Eli sensed his turmoil. "You're carrying too much," he said, tracing circles on Caleb's back. "Let me carry some of it." Caleb nodded. But the weight of his mission was heavy. He was fighting for a city that didn't fully want him, for a boy who reminded him of himself, for a love that had survived against all odds. And he wasn't done yet. The rally's aftermath left Memphis buzzing. Caleb's face was plastered across local news, some calling him a hero, others a troublemaker. He didn't care about the labels. He cared about Jordan, who'd returned to school with his head held higher. But the victory was bittersweet. Caleb's inbox overflowed with hate mail, and Eli found more graffiti on their doorstep, "Fags out." Caleb scrubbed it off himself, his hands shaking with rage. He'd won a seat, but not the city's heart. His council work intensified. Caleb proposed a non-discrimination ordinance, one that would protect LGBTQ residents in housing, employment, and public spaces. The idea sparked fierce debate. At a public hearing, Reverend Holt stood at the podium, his voice booming. "This is a Christian city, and we won't bow to sin." The crowd roared, some in agreement, others in protest. Caleb locked eyes with Eli in the back of the room, drawing strength from his quiet nod. When it was his turn to speak, Caleb stood tall. "This isn't about sin. It's about people, your neighbors, your kids, your friends. They deserve to live without fear." The room was divided, but a few nodded, their faces softening. The ordinance passed. Narrowly, Caleb celebrated with Eli and Sarah at a dive bar, clinking glasses of cheap beer. But the victory was short-lived. Businesses threatened boycotts, and Dixon, the mayor, vetoed the ordinance, calling it divisive. Caleb's blood boiled. He spent nights drafting a new strategy, rallying support to override the veto. Sarah connected him with local business owners who'd quietly supported the ordinance, and together they built a coalition. It was grueling, but Caleb thrived on the fight, his old wounds fueling his resolve. Meanwhile, Eli faced his own battles. His art gallery show was picketed by Holt's followers, who called his work degenerate. Sales plummeted, and Eli's confidence wavered. "Maybe we pushed too hard," he said one night, staring at an unsold canvas. Caleb cupped his face. "We're not here to play it safe. Your art, our love, it's worth fighting for." Eli smiled, but the strain was evident. Caleb hated seeing him hurt, but he couldn't stop now. The override vote was a nail-biter. Caleb worked every angle, meeting with council members, pleading his case. When the vote came, it passed by one. Cheers erupted in the chamber. But Caleb felt the weight of what came next. The city was fracturing, and he was at the center of it. That night, he and Eli walked along the Mississippi River, the city's lights reflecting on the water. "We're making a difference," Eli said, squeezing his hand. "But it's hard." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to promise it would get easier, but he couldn't lie. Then came the mayor's race. Dixon announced his re-election bid, leaning hard into divisive rhetoric. Caleb saw an opening. "If I run, it's all or nothing," he told Eli. Eli hesitated, then nodded. "I'm with you. Always." The campaign was brutal. Caleb's past was dragged through the mud: his exile, his sexuality, his San Francisco values. But he didn't hide. He spoke at town halls, shared his story, and listened to voters' fears and hopes. Slowly, he gained ground, especially among younger voters and communities of color, who saw in him a fighter for the marginalized. Mark reappeared, unexpectedly. He showed up at a campaign event, looking older, tired. "I don't get you," Mark said, his voice low. "But I see what you're doing." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Caleb's heart ached for the brother he'd lost, but he couldn't dwell on it. The election was weeks away, and the city was a powder keg. The final debate was electric. Dixon painted Caleb as an outsider, a radical. Caleb countered with passion, recounting his exile and return. "I didn't come back to divide this city," he said, his voice breaking. "I came back to heal it." The audience was split, but Caleb felt a shift. People were listening. Election night was a blur. Caleb and Eli watched the results roll in at the LGBTQ center, surrounded by supporters. When the anchor announced Caleb's victory, the room exploded. Eli pulled him into a kiss, tears streaming down both their faces. Caleb was Memphis's first openly gay mayor. But as he stepped onto the stage, he saw counter-protesters outside, their signs glowing in the dark. The fight wasn't over. Caleb's first day as mayor felt like stepping into a lion's den. City Hall buzzed with tension. Staffers whispered. Council members eyed him warily, and the local press circled like vultures. He stood at his office window, overlooking Memphis's sprawling skyline, and felt the weight of history. 20 years ago, this city had chased him out for loving Eli. Now, he was its leader, tasked with stitching together a divided community. Eli slipped into the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've got this," he said softly. Caleb wasn't so sure. His first act was to reinstate the non-discrimination ordinance, this time with broader support. He invited Jordan, the high school student, to the signing ceremony, a symbolic gesture that made national headlines. "This is your city too," Caleb told him, handing him the pen. Jordan's shy smile was worth every sleepless night. But the backlash was swift. Businesses pulled support, and Holt's congregation organized daily protests outside City Hall. "Center Mayor." Their signs read. Caleb ignored them, focusing on his agenda: affordable housing, better schools, and a city where no one had to hide. Eli struggled to find his place. The art scene in Memphis was smaller, less open than San Francisco's. He took a job teaching at a community center, pouring his heart into students like Jordan, who showed a knack for drawing. But the picket lines followed him too. And one night, a group of teens vandalized his classroom, spray painting slurs across his murals. Eli cleaned it up without complaint. But Caleb saw the toll it took. "We didn't sign up for easy," Eli said, forcing a smile. Caleb hated that he couldn't protect him from this. The city's budget was a mess, inherited from Dixon's mismanagement. Caleb spent long hours untangling it, working with Sarah, who'd become an unofficial advisor. She had a sharp mind for policy and a knack for rallying support. Together, they pushed for a community policing program, training officers to handle hate crimes with sensitivity. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Slowly, Caleb saw change, fewer incidents, more allies stepping up. But the old guard fought back. A councilman leaked a story to the press, accusing Caleb of favoritism toward his people. The accusation stung, but Caleb kept his focus. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for progress. Family remained a sore spot. Mark attended a city event, bringing his teenage daughter, Lily, who was curious about her uncle. "Why don't you and Dad talk?" she asked, her eyes searching. Caleb swallowed hard, unsure how to explain decades of pain. "We're trying," he said finally. Later, Mark lingered, offering a gruff, "You're doing okay, I guess." It was the closest they'd come to reconciliation, and Caleb clung to it. A crisis hit 6 months into his term. A fire tore through a low-income housing complex, displacing dozens of families, many from marginalized communities. Caleb was on the scene before dawn, coordinating with emergency services and promising aid. He worked tirelessly, securing federal funds and partnering with local nonprofits to rebuild. The press praised his leadership, but Holt's followers spun it as a publicity stunt. "He's using tragedy to push his agenda," they claimed. Caleb ignored them, focusing on the families who needed him. Eli, meanwhile, organized an art fundraiser for the displaced, his students painting murals to lift spirits. The event drew a crowd, including some who'd once shunned them. Caleb watched Eli work the room, his quiet grace winning people over. "You're the real hero," Caleb told him later, stealing a kiss in the empty community center. Eli laughed. "I'm just holding up my end." But the pressure was relentless. Caleb's health began to fray: sleepless nights, skipped meals, the constant strain of being a target. One evening, he collapsed during a council meeting, his vision blurring. Eli rushed him to the hospital, where doctors warned of exhaustion and high blood pressure. "You can't save everyone if you don't take care of yourself," Eli said, his voice firm but scared. Caleb promised to slow down, but the city's needs pulled at him. By the end of his first year, Caleb had made strides, but the city was still divided. At a town hall, a young woman stood up, her voice trembling. "I'm gay, and I'm scared to walk home at night. What are you doing about it?" Caleb met her gaze, his heart aching. "I'm fighting for you," he said. "Every damn day." It wasn't enough, but it was true. Caleb's second year as mayor was a crucible. The city was healing, but slowly, like a bone knitting itself back together. His non-discrimination ordinance had survived legal challenges, and the community policing program was showing results. Hate crimes were down, though not gone. But every step forward seemed to provoke a louder backlash. Reverend Holt's congregation grew bolder, organizing a family values rally that drew thousands. Their signs branded Caleb a threat to tradition, and their chants echoed through downtown. Caleb watched from his office, his jaw tight. "They're scared of change," Sarah told him over coffee. "Keep pushing." He did. Caleb launched an initiative to fund LGBTQ youth programs, partnering with the community center where Eli taught. The programs offered counseling, job training, and safe spaces for kids like Jordan, who'd become a regular at Eli's art classes. Jordan's confidence grew, his sketches now bold and vibrant. "You gave me a place to belong," he told Caleb one day, his voice soft but certain. Caleb's eyes stung. This was why he'd come back not for glory, but for kids who needed a chance. Eli's role in the city grew too. His art classes became a haven, drawing kids from all backgrounds. He started a mural project, painting stories of Memphis's unsung heroes, civil rights activists, queer pioneers, everyday people who'd shaped the city. The murals transformed blank walls into bursts of color, but they also drew vandals. One night, Eli found his latest work defaced with red paint. He didn't tell Caleb until the next morning, knowing it would hit him hard. "It's just paint," Eli said, but his hands shook as he scrubbed it clean. Caleb wanted to scream, to confront every bigot in the city. But Eli stopped him. "We answer with more art, more love. That's how we win." The political landscape grew trickier. Dixon, bitter from his loss, rallied a group of council members to block Caleb's budget proposals. They accused him of overspending on fringe programs, targeting his youth initiatives. Caleb fought back, presenting data on reduced crime and improved school attendance. He won enough votes to pass a leaner budget, but it cost him allies. "You're making enemies," Sarah warned. Caleb shrugged. "I didn't come here to make friends." His family ties inched toward repair. Lily, Mark's daughter, started visiting Caleb and Eli, drawn to their warmth and the stories of their life in San Francisco. One evening, she brought Mark along, unannounced. The dinner was awkward, filled with long silences, but Mark stayed. As he left, he muttered, "Lily likes you. That's something." Caleb clung to that small bridge, hoping it might grow. A new crisis loomed, a state bill that would allow businesses to refuse service based on religious beliefs. It was a direct attack on Caleb's ordinance, and he knew it could undo years of progress. He rallied allies Sarah, Jordan, local business owners, and organized a statewide campaign to fight it. They flooded the Capitol with letters, protests, and testimonies. Caleb spoke at a hearing, his voice raw with emotion. "I was chased out of this state for who I am. Don't let that happen to anyone else." The bill failed, narrowly, and Caleb's name became synonymous with resistance. But the victory came at a cost. Threats against him spiked, and Eli found a death threat slipped under their door. Caleb wanted to hire security, but Eli refused. "We can't live in a cage," he said. Instead, they leaned on their community, Sarah, Jordan, the kids from the center. It wasn't enough to stop the fear, but it kept them going. By midterm, Caleb's health was fraying again. He ignored the warning signs: chest pains, dizziness, until Eli forced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis was stress-induced cardiomyopathy, a broken heart syndrome that made Caleb laugh bitterly. "Fitting," he said. Eli wasn't amused. "You're no good to anyone if you're dead," he snapped, his fears spilling over. Caleb promised to delegate more, leaning on Sarah and his staff. But the city's needs were relentless. One night, Eli surprised him with a quiet dinner at home. Just the two of them. Candles flickered, and Eli's latest painting, a portrait of Caleb, fierce and hopeful, hung on the wall. "This is why I stay," Eli said, his voice thick. "You're worth it." Caleb pulled him close, their foreheads touching. For a moment, the city's weight lifted, and it was just them, as it had been in that diner 20 years ago. Caleb's third year as mayor was a turning point. Memphis was changing slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. The youth programs flourished, with Jordan now mentoring younger kids at the community center. Eli's murals had become a tourist draw, their stories of resilience woven into the city's fabric. Even some of Holt's followers softened, attending city events with cautious curiosity. But the scars of the past remained, and Caleb felt them every time he passed the street where he and Eli had been attacked decades ago. His biggest challenge was a proposed riverfront redevelopment project. It promised jobs and growth, but risked displacing low-income residents, many from marginalized communities. Caleb saw an opportunity to do it right: affordable housing, green spaces, and local hiring. He spent months negotiating with developers, balancing profit with fairness. At a public meeting, a woman whose family faced eviction stood up, tears in her eyes. "Will you keep us here?" she asked. Caleb met her gaze. "I'll fight like hell to make sure you stay." The crowd murmured, some skeptical, others hopeful. The project moved forward, but not without friction. Developers pushed back, and some council members accused Caleb of delaying progress. He held firm, backed by Sarah and a growing coalition of activists. When the first affordable units opened, Caleb handed keys to the woman from the meeting, her kids beaming beside her. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The press called it Caleb's legacy, but he brushed it off. "It's the city's legacy," he said. Eli's art career was rebounding. A local gallery offered him a solo show, and his work raw, emotional depictions of Memphis's struggles and triumphs drew crowds. At the opening, Caleb stood in the back, watching Eli shine. A stranger approached, an older man with a weathered face. "You're the mayor," he said. "Not a question. Your husband's work makes me see this city differently." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. Moments like these made the fight worth it. Family ties grew stronger. Mark invited Caleb and Eli to Lily's high school graduation, a gesture that felt like a truce. At the ceremony, Mark pulled Caleb aside. "I was wrong," he said, his voice gruff. "Not about everything, but about you." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was enough. Lily hugged them both, her smile wide. "You're my heroes," she whispered. Caleb's eyes burned, but he held it together. The state legislature tried again to undermine Caleb's work, this time with a bill targeting transgender rights. Caleb and Sarah mobilized, organizing protests and lobbying lawmakers. Jordan spoke at a rally, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm here because of people like Mayor Caleb," he said. The crowd roared, and Caleb felt a surge of pride. The bill was defeated, but the fight drained him. He was tired bone deep, soul-weary tired. Eli noticed. One night, he found Caleb staring at old photos from their San Francisco days, his eyes distant. "You're carrying the whole city," Eli said, sitting beside him. "Let me help." Caleb sighed. "I don't know how to stop." Eli took his hand. "You don't stop. You just share it." They sat in silence, the weight of their journey heavy but shared. A new thread emerged, a recall campaign, led by Holt and backed by Dixon's old allies. They claimed Caleb was dividing the city with his radical agenda. Petitions circulated, and the press amplified the noise. Caleb fought back, holding town halls to hear directly from residents. Many supported him, sharing stories of how his policies had changed their La Visa job, a home, a sense of safety. But the opposition was loud, and the recall vote loomed. Election night was tense. Caleb and Eli waited at City Hall, surrounded by supporters. Sarah kept the mood light, joking about her terrible coffee-making skills. When the results came in, the recall failed by a wide margin. The room erupted, but Caleb's relief was tempered. He knew the opposition wouldn't stop. "They'll keep coming," he told Eli later, as they lay in bed. Eli kissed his forehead. "And we'll keep fighting." By year's end, Caleb's health stabilized, thanks to Eli's insistence on rest and routine. They took a rare weekend off, driving to the Smoky Mountains. Under a starlit sky, Caleb felt the city's weight lift, if only for a moment. "We're doing it," he said. his voice soft. Eli smiled. Yeah, we are. Caleb's fourth year as mayor was a reckoning. Memphis was no longer the city that had exiled him. But it wasn't a utopia either. His policies had taken root. Affordable housing expanded. Youth programs thrived. And the city's first Pride Parade drew thousands. With Eli's murals as a colorful backdrop, Jordan marched at the front, carrying a flag he'd designed himself. Caleb watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling. But the opposition hadn't vanished. Holt's congregation dwindled, but their anger burned hotter. And anonymous threats still arrived, each one a reminder of the city's lingering hate. A new challenge emerged, a federal grant to revitalize Memphis's schools. It was a chance to address decades of underfunding. But it came with strict oversight and political pressure. Caleb dove in, working with teachers and parents to craft a plan that prioritized equity. He visited schools, meeting kids who reminded him of himself, outsiders, dreamers, fighters. At one school, a shy lesbian teen approached him. "You make me feel like I can stay," she said. Caleb hugged her, his voice catching. "You belong here." Eli's art became a bridge. His latest project, a mural series called Memphis Rising, depicted the city's history, its pain, its triumphs, its diversity. The final piece, unveiled at City Hall, showed two hands clasped, one light, one dark, against a backdrop of the Mississippi River. Caleb recognized the hands as theirs, and his eyes welled up. "You're telling our story," he whispered at the unveiling. Eli shrugged, blushing. "It's everyone's story." The political machine kept grinding. A new council member, backed by Dixon's allies, tried to undermine Caleb's initiatives, delaying votes and spreading rumors. Caleb countered with transparency, live streaming council meetings and inviting public input. It worked. Voters appreciated his openness, and the council members' influence waned. But the constant battles wore on Caleb. He started snapping at staff, losing patience in ways he hadn't before. Eli noticed, pulling him aside one night. "You're not alone in this," he said. "Don't shut me out." Caleb apologized, leaning into Eli's embrace. They were a team, always. Mark's relationship with Caleb grew steadier. He invited them to Lily's college send-off party, a small gathering at his home. It was the first time Caleb had been inside his brother's house since they were kids. Mark was quiet but kind, and when Lily hugged Caleb goodbye, she whispered, "Thanks for showing me what courage looks like." Caleb drove home in silence, overwhelmed by the slow healing of old wounds. A personal crisis hit when Eli's mother, who'd been distant since their San Francisco days, fell ill. Eli flew to Ohio, leaving Caleb alone for the first time in years. The house felt empty, and Caleb realized how much he leaned on Eli's quiet strength. When Eli returned, his mother stable but frail, he was shaken. "She asked about you," Eli said. "She's trying." Caleb held him close, grateful for small steps forward. The recall campaign's failure had emboldened Caleb's supporters, but it also galvanized his enemies. A new state bill threatened to strip local governments of control over non-discrimination policies. Caleb led a coalition of mayors to fight it, traveling to Nashville to testify. "This isn't just about Memphis," he told lawmakers. "It's about every kid who's scared to be themselves." The bill stalled, but the fight drained him. He came home to find Eli waiting with a Surprizia weekend retreat at a cabin by the river. They fished, laughed, and talked about the future. "What's next?" Eli asked. Caleb sighed. "Keep fighting. Keep loving." By year's end, Caleb announced his re-election bid. The decision wasn't easy, for years had aged him, and Eli worried about his health. But Caleb felt unfinished. There's more to do, he told Eli, who nodded, resolute. The campaign was smoother this time, with a broader base of support. Jordan, now in college, returned to canvas for him. Sarah ran his campaign with fierce efficiency. Even Mark showed up at a rally, clapping awkwardly from the back. Election night brought a landslide victory. Caleb stood on stage, Eli at his side, and looked out at a crowd that reflected the city's diversity. "We're not done," he said, his voice strong. "This is our Memphis." The cheers were deafening, but Caleb's eyes were on Eli, the man who'd carried him through it all. Caleb's second term was a testament to resilience. Memphis was no longer just a city that had chased him out. It was a city he was shaping, block by block, heart by heart. His school revitalization program bore fruit as scores rose, and dropout rates fell. The Riverfront Project thrived, with affordable homes and green spaces drawing families back to the city. Pride grew into a week-long festival, with Eli's murals as its centerpiece. Jordan, now a college junior, spoke at the opening ceremony, his voice confident. "This city taught me I'm enough," he said. Caleb, watching from the crowd, felt a lump in his throat. But the work was never done. Hate crimes persisted, though fewer, and Holt's dwindling followers still protested. Their signs faded, but their anger sharp. Caleb met with community leaders, including a new pastor who preached inclusion. Together, they launched dialogues between churches and the LGBTQ Center. Small steps toward understanding. Some walked away, but others stayed, listening. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Eli's art became a cultural force. His Memphis Rising series was acquired by a national museum, and he was invited to speak at schools across the South. He brought Caleb along to one, where a student asked, "How do you keep going when people hate you?" Eli glanced at Caleb, smiling. "You find people who love you and hold on tight." Caleb squeezed his hand, grateful for the truth in those words. Politically, Caleb faced new challenges. A national wave of conservative policies threatened local gains, and he spent long hours fighting to protect his city's autonomy. Sarah, now a councilwoman, was his fiercest ally, her sharp wit cutting through opposition. They passed a landmark housing equity bill, ensuring protections for renters. At the signing, Caleb thought of the families he'd met after the fire, their faces now filled with hope. His relationship with Mark deepened. They weren't the brothers they'd been, but they were building something new. Mark invited Caleb and Eli to Thanksgiving, a chaotic affair with Lily home from college. As they carved the turkey, Mark raised a glass. "To family," he said, meeting Caleb's eyes. It was enough. Caleb's health remained a concern. He followed Eli's strict schedule morning walks, regular checkups, but the stress lingered. One night, he woke from a nightmare, the old Memphis slurs echoing in his mind. Eli held him, whispering, "You're here. You're safe." Caleb clung to him, grounding himself in their love. As his term neared its end, Caleb reflected on his journey. He'd returned to a city that had broken him, determined to change it. He hadn't erased its flaws, but he'd carved out space for those who'd been pushed to the margins. At a final town hall, a young man stood up. "I came out because of you," he said. "Thank you." Caleb's voice broke as he replied, "Thank you for staying." On his last day as mayor, Caleb walked the riverfront with Eli, the city's lights shimmering. A new mayor would take over, one he'd mentored, a black lesbian woman who'd grown up in Memphis's toughest neighborhoods. Caleb trusted her to carry the torch. As they stood by the water, Eli pulled out a sketch of young men, hands clasped, under a Memphis sky. "This is us," he said. Then and now. Caleb kissed him, tears falling. They'd been chased out, but they'd come back, and they'd changed everything. The city wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Kids like Jordan walked taller. Families stayed in their homes. Love was no longer a crime. Caleb and Eli moved to a quiet house on the city's edge, where Eli painted and Caleb mentored young leaders. They'd fought, loved, and won not just for themselves, but for every soul who'd ever felt cast out. Memphis was no longer a place of exile. It was a place of hope. As they sat on their porch, watching the sunset, Caleb took Eli's hand. "Worth it?" he asked. Eli smiled, his eyes bright. Every second. And in that moment, under the vast Tennessee sky, Caleb knew they'd done more than survive. They'd rewritten the city's story. One of courage, love, and unrelenting humanity.